we as a school system, we as educators, we're ringing the alarm. We're sounding it loud, saying something needs to change. We are at a breaking point in the province of Ontario. Something needs to change, and it needs to change now.
Welcome back to Closer Look across the Village Media Network and, of course, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. I'm Scott Sexsmith with Michael Friscoletti. That was like a Don Cherry thumbs up.
See that? I know.
Our editor-in-chief here at Village Media. CloserLookPodcast.ca is the website. It looks great, brand new. Plus, you can sign up, and we will send you episodes every night.
And it's real.
It is real.
100% authentic.
We were just talking about that.
There is no AI involved in the production of this show.
No.
As awful as we might sound, we are real.
Well, AI would be far more
Yeah,
polished.
that's the thing. AI would be you could tell that we're deeply flawed, so we know that it's accurate. And the newsletter you get will be real too. It'll actually be written by a human.
Yeah.
And the show will be recorded by
real
humans, produced by humans on the other side.
Yep.
It's I've become obsessed with this.
I know. Every day you've got to comment
stop.
about it.
It's outrageous.
It is outrageous.
The fact that we have to remind people that it's real.
And, speaking of AI, it's becoming so predominant now in schools. Mm-hmm. And, of course, schools recently back in session.
Yes.
Kids back in the hallowed halls of learning.
Yes.
I often think back to the Staples commercial. Remember the most wonderful time of the year?
We used to joke with the kids about that all the time.
I know.
It was great.
And even though
I didn't see it this year.
I didn't either.
Maybe I'm not watching enough.
Well, kids are older,
just
right?
watching AI reels on my phone all day, and I'm not seeing anything going on. It's school. We're going to talk about schools today.
Yeah, but sadly, it's not funny what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and I think it's all part of it. The social media, we've talked on this show before about
no question
about cell phone use among young people and the social media giants that are being sued by school boards for millions of dollars because of the impact they've had on schools. And basically the allegations in these lawsuits are that they've caused complete chaos in school. The kids are just staring at their phones, they're on Snapchat, they're on TikTok, they're doing whatever. Now you have this other element where new reports are starting to show that the level of violence in Ontario schools is through the roof.
Yes.
New numbers obtained or released under Freedom of Information by the provincial government, new study by the University of Ottawa, even research by the unions that represent education workers, all showing that violent incidents
numbers are staggering.
I mean, I really don't know. I think being a teacher or an EA or any worker in the school system right now is completely different than it was 30 years ago. It's not even 30 years ago. You still had control of what's going on in your classroom. There's no. I mean, I think it's good that we hide down in this basement, and maybe we should just let the AI robots take over.
And that cell phone ban in schools, how's that working out?
It's working out great.
That's great.
Working out great.
Speaking of thumbs up.
Yeah, thumbs up, yeah. So we're going to talk violence in schools today with two people who know the subject very well.
We are Joe Tagani, who's the president of the Ontario School Board Council of Unions, and Darby Mallory, who co-authored a U of Ottawa report titled Running on Fumes, Violence, Austerity, and Institutional Neglect in Ontario Schools. It's going to be quite the discussion.
Yeah, welcome back to class.
It's that time of year again that kids across the province are settling back into school after the summer break. But for the people who work in our classrooms, the job has become more challenging than ever. Various reports have revealed a major spike in violent incidents across Ontario schools. What's driving the huge increase, and what can be done about it? Tonight on the show, we're joined by Joe Tagani, the president of the Ontario School Board Council of Unions, which, by the way, speaks for about 57,000 CUPE education workers across the province, including EAs, custodians, early childhood educators. And Darby Mallory is here, the co-author of a University of Ottawa report titled Running on Fumes, Violence, Austerity, and Institutional Neglect in Ontario Schools. Thanks to both of you for being here. Joe, I'd like to start with you first. Last month, Global News used a Freedom of Information legislation to uncover an alarming statistic. The number of violent incidents reported by school boards to the Ministry of Education has risen by 77% since Doug Ford took office. with more than 4,400 incidents reported in the 2023-24 school year alone. What's your reaction to those numbers?
Well, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised in the least. The interesting and the most alarming is the 75%, because that number, I think, can really be extrapolated across the province. The reported number of 4,400 or 4,400 and some odd number is actually low. That's a number that they used through that freedom of information around specific types of violent incidents that are reporting. Because when you drill down and take the number of school days divided by the number of boards, although that number sounds high, that's actually not really very high. The alarming piece is the rise, which probably can be connected across all school boards and all types of violence. So I'm not surprised in the least. We've seen that over the last several years where there just has been a consistent increase of violent incidents. It's alarming. It's concerning. I'm not at all surprised by that number. Like I said, the 75% is what's really eye-opening and should be very alarming to people in Ontario.
Darby, let's bring you into the conversation. You were the lead author on a recent University of Ottawa research report that nearly 6,000 education sector workers in the province, when it comes to violence, what did those workers tell you specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So this research is coming out of a national survey that we did in the fall a couple of years ago. And what I think is most striking and what we all need to take note of is, like Joe said, that this is a pervasive issue. Something like 4,400 unique instances of violence being reported is a low number. On average, our respondents had reported 22 and a half unique instances of violence from students, administrators, colleagues, and parents during a single school year. Wow. And, over 80% of respondents had, in fact, experienced at least one unique instance. So talking about the vast majority of people experiencing, witnessing, and being around violence in schools.
Can you give us some examples, Darby? What kind of violence are we talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of student-initiated acts, attempts, and threats of physical force, we're talking about a huge range of behaviors. Things like water bottles being thrown across a classroom towards an education sector worker, people being bitten, hit, kicked, slapped. We're also seeing things like, physical acts that are threatening in nature. So people being, shown behaviors that would insinuate harm being attempted. In terms of other things, we're seeing a lot of swearing, a lot of pervasive and discriminatory language being used, overt and covert racism being deployed by students in the classroom against different types of education sector workers, and lots of different behaviors that are known to be discriminatory in nature.
Joe, what's driving all this violence?
Well, it's ironic listening to what Darby just said and going back to your initial question. That's the type of data that's not being reported in that number of 4,400, right? As alarming as that information was in that number, all of those pieces that she alluded to would make that number astronomical. And boards have that data. That's just not something that they're reporting the same way, by the way, which Global got that information. So what's contributing to this? A lot of things. I think we have a Ford government who has not kept up with the funding required to support students in Ontario. They may say they've had record investment. They can say that, till they're blue in the face. The reality is, in schools, we're not in a better place than we were 7 years ago when this government took power. We have less education workers to support all different types of students and those student needs. And they're very different, very complex needs. And as Darby alluded to, there's a lot of different pieces of that. Having more people in schools to help would help mitigate some of those things before they happen. So we could actually cut those things off before we end up in a crisis situation in our schools. And unfortunately, that's become the norm. We have crisis after crisis, fire after fire in classrooms across the province. But unfortunately, we need to see a real investment in frontline education workers in Ontario.
Darby, this is an obvious question, but how is all these incidents impacting the people who are on the front lines and doing this work?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of what's really devastating about this is that going to work every single day, experiencing or witnessing violence has become the reality and what's normal for most education sector workers across Ontario. And I would go so far as to say across Canada. So I think there's inevitably a huge impact on workers. People are disillusioned with the lack of impact that is going on. And as a result, they're less likely to report, which, as Joe said, is really coming out in the data that's been able to be accessed by Global News. And I think that that's what we're seeing. Not only are people being physically impacted by the injuries, illnesses, having to take time off work to cope with an injury they've sustained in the workplace, but there's also the mental injury that is caused by going to work every single day and experiencing violence, being told that this is part of your job description, being told that there's no solutions available to help mitigate or manage the violence, and being expected to continue to face it every single day with no end in sight. But beyond that, we know that these education sector workers are parents, their spouses, their family members. These people are going home having experienced violence in the workplace on an almost daily basis and carrying the troubles of that home. They may be exhausted. They may be too tired to, hang out with their own children. And I think that that's an impact that's often overlooked. And on top of that, we know that nobody learns in a classroom that's full of violence. Other students who are witnessing violence, who are being told that violence against primarily women education sector workers is normal, that's super problematic and something that we should all be paying more attention to.
Darby, I'll stay with you on that point. As things get worse, it's almost like there's a sense that it's becoming normalized, as in, well, it's just a part of the job now. Your comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's certainly something that has happened. The vast majority of education sector workers we interviewed and surveyed over the last couple of years spoke about the ubiquity of the violence and how that's become normalized. So like Joe was saying, there's a huge underreporting issue. And that's just the simple reality of the fact that when somebody experiences multiple incidents of violence on a daily basis at work, they can't be expected to take time during their personal day after work when they finally leave the workplace to report 12 different instances using 4 forms for each instance. It's just unmanageable. And I think that that really speaks to the way that it's becoming normalized. Of course, there are instances that are absolutely being reported, but I think that I would go so far as to say that those are the most severe instances. The daily sort of hitting, slapping, kicking, those little, maybe more minor in terms of behaviors are not often being reported. And more we see that those are being framed by administrators as just, a small behavioral issue. They swipe it under the rug and expect that it's not going to need to be dealt with because they are coping with the reality that schools are vastly understaffed and vastly underfunded, and they just simply can't keep up with the amount of issues that are happening in the classrooms on a daily basis.
We talk about resources. Joe, do you have numbers on, are there actually fewer EAs in classrooms now than there were, say, 5 years ago?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there are less, but there are more needs, right? The diverse needs that we see in our schools now, we haven't kept up with the demand, right? We know more about, we actually are better prepared as a society to help support students. Unfortunately, we don't have the funding to get boots on the ground in schools to help support these students that are coming into our schools. A great example of this is we often look at COVID. COVID became this really bizarre, element in our life. You would think coming out of COVID, when we could have predicted there would be some odd social behaviors from all generations, not just kids, but kids in particular that really struggled being at home, not seeing their friends. Like they just had such a different existence for that period of time. You would think you would have doubled down as a government to try and find a way to invest and make sure that those kids had the right pieces in place for them moving forward. But there really wasn't. There was, a focus on cleaning protocols, and that was important. Don't get me wrong. But we forgot about all of these little people, especially transitioning into school, but also kids from, grade 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all of them that basically were off the grid, were unable to communicate, didn't have any social or human interaction. It was such a weird time, and we have not really got back to where we needed to with putting investment into our schools. So, I think there's a real solution. Yeah, it's investing in frontline education workers in the province of Ontario to make sure that the right supports are in place to help these kids that really they're not doing anything wrong, right? That's the one thing I really need to point out, that they come to school to learn, and we need to try and figure out how to best support them in that process.
You make a great point about the lingering effects of COVID, and then you worry about how much of that still lingers. You're absolutely correct. Darby, what struck me too about your research report was the stat that nearly half of respondents experienced parent-initiated harassment, which really concerns me as a parent of 2 kids in school. What's driving that? And I mean, that's just that half of workers would have that interaction. That's scary.
Yeah, and it's absolutely something that appears to be new in our data. We've always asked about parents, other workers, and administrators just to gauge sort of the entirety of the situation. But the fact that almost half of respondents have experienced at least one instance of parent harassment with an average of over 4 is certainly striking information. I think there's many things that are going on for sure. I think that we have seen a public rhetoric over the last 10 to 20 years that has truly villainized education sector workers as having it all. And as a result, parents have been, coaxed by this sort of political rhetoric to think that these people are there to serve them. And I think that there's a real disconnect between the old days where parents worked with education sector workers and knew that these people have the best intentions. They're there to help their children, everyone's children, learn, grow, and achieve all of their dreams. And I think that this sort of idea that education sector workers don't have the best intentions has been used by political people to try to help mitigate some of the professionalization of workers. We've also seen, rhetoric, very anti-union rhetoric over the last 10 to 5 years. We see the ways that this whole, delegitimization of professionals has become so pervasive, and this idea that we can't trust professionals is really becoming clear in schools. On the other hand, I also think that parents are frustrated. I think that there are lots of parents who go into schools every day to drop their kids off and see that their kids are not getting the support that they need. And I do think that is absolutely legitimate, but it doesn't, of course, legitimize the way that they're taking that frustration out on education sector workers themselves. So I think there's sort of 2 parts. There's, a complicated mix of things, but I think we need to help refocus the agenda and say, we're all working on the same page. We all need to be mobilizing with unions to help try to get more funding in schools, more staff in schools, and more resources for all students who need them.
Joe, this may be the most obvious of questions, but how does all of this impact student learning and well-being?
Yeah, with violent incidents in classes, in schools up, it disrupts learning. So every time there is a disruption in a classroom, whether that means a classroom needs to be vacated because the student might be in crisis, it's impacting students every single day. We have, Darby alluded to it, we have a massive recruitment and retention issue. So we have insufficient supports now. And when we have people that are away that can't be replaced because people aren't going to come in and do that work anymore because it's no longer desirable to come in and potentially be a punching bag in a school setting when you're coming in and going to deal with that level of violence. We're talking about, and I'm sure if we had more time, we could get into specific testimonials that I'm sure, would break your heart. And Darby could allude to the different things that I'm sure that they've read. People, the level of exposure of violence that people are subjected to is that of like first responders, police, jail guards. Like that's the type of violence that we're seeing in schools that it's not being reported properly. It's not being captured. It's not being articulated. So it kind of goes back to when you come into a school, the people that are there are doing everything in their power to care for your children. But their hands are often tied, sometimes one hand behind their back, sometimes 2 hands behind their back because they don't have enough resources. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough people in the building to properly support. So that's what we see. You have you put little Jimmy or Sally on the bus and you think they're going to school and having just that perfect day. There's that communication breakdown in the home. Like, how often do parents ask their children, how was your day? What happened? You might be awfully surprised if you engaged in a conversation as a family. And that's even a challenge now, right? Families are busy. Everyone's going in different directions. They got different sports and activities and everybody's, scheduled to the max. But if you took the time to sit down and have a conversation with your kids, I think you might be shocked at the level of interruption, the level of insufficient support that they witness. Depending on their age, they're able to see, wow, we didn't get to go to the library today because the library was closed because there's no person to open the library today. That's the type of thing that just doesn't get captured well enough. And I think we as a school system, we as educators, we're ringing the alarm. We're sounding it loud, saying something needs to change. We are at a breaking point in the province of Ontario. Something needs to change, and it needs to change now.
It's a great transition, Joe. Because Darby, I think it was your report that mentioned how workplace violence in Ontario schools remains the best kept secret. Is that starting to change?
Yeah, I think that there is certainly more recognition. I think that unions have been mobilizing on this issue for far longer than we have been researching this issue. But, our survey in late 2022 was the first national survey to look at this issue. So I think there's still absolutely room for growth. But like Joe said, we have the last page in our report is called Parents Need to Know, because it truly is a best kept secret. I'm sure there are education sector workers that roll their eyes and say, we've been talking about this for 10 to 15 years. Yeah. Absolutely. But I think that the normalization of violence and evacuations and chaos in the learning environment is also happening among the youngest learners. Many students are not going home and saying, my classroom was evacuated for the 50th time this year, because it's becoming normal to them. And so I think that's part of why we're trying to, spread the word and support union mobilization in those efforts, so that people really do understand the complexity of schools now. The truth of the matter is that schools just simply are not the same as they were 20 years ago.
Can I just add something to that?
Go ahead, Joe. Yeah.
And even a government that's driven by EQAO data or results, that type of information, those interruptions impact learning. And no one could ever try and say that it doesn't. So by investing in education supports to mitigate those, you would actually see an increase in EQAO data. And trust me, I'm not a fan or proponent of that data as a method by which we should use, but I'm saying a government that often uses those numbers, an investment in this actually would pay dividends for them later on. So they could actually have a investment and what it looks like at the end. But again, this is a government that doesn't want to do that. They're simply looking for a way to starve the system, ultimately, in my humble opinion, to look to ways to prioritize it. And the rich will enjoy a lovely education system, and those that are not will struggle.
We see it, Joe, now. I think it's 5 school boards in Ontario that have been taken over by the provincial government. They're saying that this is the best way forward for those boards. They want to get them back on track, quote unquote, I believe is the term. Will that do anything to help the workplace violence issue, the way this Conservative government is moving on taking over school boards?
Absolutely not. By taking over school boards is going to have no impact on school violence whatsoever. You're going to have one appointed person coming in from the government to govern or run the school board. You have elected trustees now who are basically silenced. So even as a parent, how do you have a conversation with someone to get your message across to the board? This is simply the Ford government's way of silencing the elected people, the trustees that you and I elect in our community to be our voice at the school board level. So I don't think it's going to have anything. If anything, it's going to make things worse.
Can I just add that?
Go ahead, Dora.
Sorry, thank you.
No problem.
I just want to say also, we talk a lot about structural violence and institutional neglect and the way that this lack of funding is actually causing violence. And I think that the rhetoric around, overspending and inappropriate spending is also being used to obscure important information about challenges that schools are facing. So instead of acknowledging that schools are struggling because they've been underfunded for the last 20 years, we say, oh, there's certain, trustees that have overspent, and that's why your students don't have resources. It's sort of just a scapegoat instead of facing the real truth, and that's that schools are desperately in need of funding so that they can adequately staff classrooms and provide resources for students.
All right, and that is where we shall end it. The bell has rung. Joe Tagani and Darby Mowry, thank you both for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Man, how times have changed, and I'll tell you a story.
I love your stories.
I remember being in grade 9 French, and having the teacher throw chalk at me.
Really? I'm shocked that they would throw chalk at you.
Now, granted, I probably deserved it.
Yeah, you did.
I'm not going to say that I didn't, but...
Yeah. It was the other way around. The violence used to come from the teachers,
Absolutely.
but it kept people in line. Just the fear of violence kept the kids in line.
I remember the pointer being slapped on my desk.
Oh, yeah.
Close to my hand. I mean, we're dating ourselves.
No,
here,
but we had an elementary school teacher who was known for that, smacking that big ruler. And I won't name names because, they could libel the person or defame them, but it's totally flipped the other way.
Completely
it's totally flipped the other way. I agree with what Darby said about, yes, parents are frustrated, but I feel like, that's the bell really has rung.
See? Class dismissed.
Parents really are frustrated, but at the same time, it's not appropriate that 50% of education workers are saying they're being harassed by parents in that way or feeling that they're under threat. That's not the way to handle things. We need to kind of be on the same team. But I would say that I've always respected – we all have friends and family that are teachers or EAs or ECs, and it is a very, very difficult job. I would last 4 minutes in a classroom. I would fail miserably as a teacher.
That's about 3.5 minutes longer than I could do.
So you know what? Let's hope there's a better year ahead in terms of the violence going on in Ontario.
And those 30 seconds would include a washroom break for me. True story.
And
Couldn't do it.
And chalk would be in the story.
It would be. Friday on the show, U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Pete Hoekstra. I know I sound like a broken record to steal your line. But he's the closest thing we're going to get to Donald Trump. Yeah. And we're going to have a great discussion.
Yeah. So far, we're still going to get Trump.
Of course we will.
But that's a great start.
That'll be a tremendous discussion.
Yes.
The most tremendous discussion ever had.
No violence.
None. Maybe the odd piece of chalk. All right. Closerlookpodcast.ca is our website. Go to it, bookmark it, and make sure that you sign up to have the newsletter sent to you each and every day with brand new episodes of Closer Look.
Let's do it.
And you can follow and subscribe on YouTube at Closer Look Podcast. For Michael Friscaletti, Editor-in-Chief here at Village Media, I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for watching. Enjoy what's left of your evening. We'll see you tomorrow night at 7 right here on Closer Look.
Frisco and Scott's Wardrobe provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.